Morning, everyone, and welcome to Avero's weekly live stream. Today, we're taking on a different topic, maybe not a different topic, but a different take on the same topic on how do you do ERP implementations better. And with me, I have a very special guest today. And before I go there, I want to introduce myself. I'm AV. I'm the founder and CEO at Avero Advisors. We are an independent third-party consulting firm that specializes in taking local governments out of the dark ages, taking them to a modern ERP system as an independent third party. So what that means is we're always in your corner. We're always looking out for your best interests, and we'll help you choose the best product and implement it because there's a lot of choice and lots of noise in the market. And is my camera is a little odd. Am I a little?
You look good to me.
All right, that's all that matters. All right. So with that, I'm gonna introduce Isaac real quickly. Isaac is a newer member of the team. He's an associate consultant, and the reason Isaac's on the live stream is because he shares a common passion and aspiration to become a pilot. And if you don't know, I have been going through flight training, and I can take off and land a plane, but FAA won't let me do that by myself just yet. So Isaac, why don't you introduce yourself and let's go for it.
Yeah, for sure. And we still got to get together and fly sometime.
I,
That'll be good. Yeah. So appreciate the introduction, Av. As you said, I'm a newer member here, but I'm a graduate of the University of Tennessee. Studied finance and leadership there. And then I have a little bit of background in actual financial work and then insurance as well. As far as aviation is concerned, I do have a little bit of experience there, sitting at about 250 hours of flight time right now. So for those that don't know, that's private with an instrument rating generally, and looking to get commercial here soon, which is not as exciting as it sounds. That does not mean I'm flying a 737 anytime soon, so don't get any ideas.
hey, one of us needs to have a proper license before I'll fly with you.
Yeah.
Around. So what's interesting is that there's so many similarities between ERP implementations. And I know there are going to be people out there that will jump at me and say, "What are you talking about?" Right? But when you're flying, think about it. You go through a process of checklists, right? You're not gonna just get in the plane and take off. Well, some of us do that. I think that's probably why the FAA won't let me fly it because I'm fly by the seat kind of guy. But most of the time, it is you have to have a checklist. You need to have your flight plan. You need to know exactly where you're going. You need to know what your weight and balance is. You need to do pre-flight checklists to make sure that your aircraft is ready for flight. And I was talking to Isaac the other day and thinking about the similarities to aviation, and we came up with this idea. Why don't we do a live stream? So here we are. So let's talk about what those similarities are, Isaac. What are your? I know you're newer to this industry, but you're not new to flight. So what have you seen so far that you think is similar?
Yeah, no, you're right. I can speak to aviation for sure. And I think one of the first things that, you talk about when you're flying is all the stuff you have to do at the beginning, right? How much work goes in, well, maybe at least, maybe not when AV flies, but when everyone else flies, all the work that goes in um, at the beginning, right? So, like you said, you walk around the plane and you look at every single rut, you look at every screw, make sure that nothing's missing. Did the last person that flew hit a bird? Like all these crazy things that could have gone wrong, could go wrong. And that's what you're looking for. You're looking for things that could go wrong, and you're trying to prepare for that. So front loading all of that stuff is super important. Like you said, you don't want to just take off and fly. So doing just your due diligence in the beginning of the whatever it is, ERP or business process review, doing that due diligence at the beginning, I think is one of the most important things you can do.
So the title of this session is altitude checklists, um, and controls, right? So when you're embarking on an ERP project, I think the first thing as a new pilot you are taught to do is read the environment, right? What's the weather going to be like? What's the cloud cover? Are you even allowed to fly if the sky isn't a certain percentage clear? So that sets your altitude. That sets your day up in terms of are you even allowed to go out there? So I think pre-ERP assessments are probably an equivalent of that. Even before you get
Yep.
into this airplane and go, you need to make sure you know where you're going, if the conditions are right, and if you're even guaranteed taking off. Forget landing the plane. So I'm trying to pull this presentation up. It's not cooperating. But we have some great talking points about all of that. Um, and we're also going to talk about what the team needs to look like, right? Your aircraft has a crew. There's a pilot, a co-pilot, and I'm talking about big commercial airplanes now, right? Not the
Yeah.
little ones that you and I fly. You've got a
Yeah.
crew.
Not just me and you.
Um, yeah, you've got a crew that has certain tasks and jobs, and they have various abilities, and all of this needs to work together if you want your plane to go anywhere. So why are we talking about this? This is such a weird topic to talk about, but what is the similarity, and why is Aware talking about it? A, because we are aviation nerds. There's a few of us actually. Isaac's the only one I could wrangle to come on this live stream. But there's clear parallels between flying and ERP implementations. And we are public sector focused. We are tailored for government implementation. We know the challenges that public sector agencies face when doing ERP implementations. And what we're going to bring from this session is practical insights, actionable strategies for implementation success. We've talked about quite a bit, but I think putting a new metaphor on it might make it a little more exciting. And what we're going to do today is compare flying to ERP implementations. So where do we start? Our journey today will go something like this: pre-flight preparation, to me, which is in the ERP readiness assessment. Are you even ready to take this project on? And when we do a pre-flight preparation, probably starts the day before you're even gonna fly,
Yep.
and then you get to the airfield. Before you even get to the airplane, we are taught to sit down and really think about what is going on. Is your body ready? Is the weather right? What kind of airplane are you going to be flying? Brush up on your ATC communications if you haven't flown for a while.
Yep.
What else happens before you even get to the airfield, Isaac?
Yeah, absolutely. Like you said, it
Or MS?
starts for those bigger flights. You know, if you're not just putting around the airport practicing takeoff and landings, there is a lot of planning that goes into it, right? So you're talking day before, you're calling the National Weather Center to get a briefing for what the weather is going to be in the future, right? Obviously, subject to change, but you're trying to do what you can to make sure that you understand what you're getting into that next day. You're making sure that your plane is ready to fly. So, is it airworthy? Do you have all the certifications you need? Are they all valid? Are they all current? And then you're gonna map out, your route before, for your flight plan and all that stuff. There's also, like you said, as far as like pilots go, we have an I'm safe checklist. Things like illness. Are you feeling sick that day? Medication. Have you taken anything that maybe you normally don't? Um, there's all kinds of things. Fatigue is part of that checklist. So it's just a really comprehensive list of, are you ready to take on this journey that you're preparing to do, the next day?
Well, and in our world, in the real world, not the airplane world, there's no FAA. So who do you turn to make sure that the conditions are perfect for you to take off? Um, there is no central authority. There is no governing body. So you have to rely on partners like us to tell you if you have the right conditions to taking off. So that's pre-flight, and then you have checklists. With airplanes, and when you're flying, you have to do 17 things at the same time, and you have to be good at them all, right? And the best way of keeping up with all of that is through checklists. So you have pre-flight checklists during the flight, pre-takeoff, after takeoff, pre-landing. There's 100 different things to do, and it's just a culture with pilots. um, that you have to be sure that you're checking off, and newer planes have them on the screens, right? You just go press buttons and the checklist pops up and you check them off. Um, and then the next thing is the crew. Uh, I think in terms of ERP implementations, your governance team, your project sponsorship, that's your crew. The flight attendants are the end users and maybe the functional experts that are actually going to be working with your end users, making sure that they have what they need and that they're following the plan. Uh, Again, very, very important, right? You and I are flying in the cockpit, but we have to make sure that our passengers are also following the plan. They're turning their phones off, seatbelts in, that they know what happens if there is a disaster. So the crew is extremely important, obviously, in an airplane, but also in an ERP implementation where you have your governance team, you have your project sponsors, you have your functional teams, you have your subject matter experts, you have PMO, you have external consultants, everyone playing a specific role, taking a project to success. It can't happen just because the pilot says, I know how to fly, screw everything else, we're going to go. And then the last thing is
Right.
landing safely. Implementation success factors, right? You have to make sure you have the right conditions, that you've defined what implementation go live looks like, and that you can land this plane safely. Before we started today, you mentioned something about ATC communications, and that is such a, when I fly that, I have a huge problem with that. I need to really pay attention, as do most pilots, right? Because sometimes
That's
it's garbage. Like, what did you just say? And so the connection I'm making here is the language, not necessarily uh, English versus French. Here in the US, all ATC pilots, operators, and pilots speak English. In the vendor world and the software world, everyone here speaks English. And sometimes it's in the translation. Do you understand what ATC or the vendor or the software provider or the consultant is saying to you before you respond? So, what do you think those similarities, or how do you navigate those waters?
yeah, absolutely. And I know any pilot, any student pilot, anyone that's been on a discovery flight, anyone that's listened to live ATC, whatever it might be, and the ATC is air traffic control. For those who haven't heard that, it is a completely different world. Any pilot that's done that has had the experience where they've gotten some big read off from the tower. You know, these can. Here, I'll give you an example. Like as you're coming into land, you might get, November 48 Fox Alpha, maintain 5,000 until established, heading 150, cleared ILS, runway 23, switch to tower, 112.3. Like, nobody got anything out of that that doesn't have the experience that these pilots do, right? And so that first time that you hear that, it's kind of one of those as you go to key the mic and you have no idea what to say back. You don't know what they said. Um, and
But
so
what
you
happens
kind of
if you
need
say copy? Right? When if you
copy.
don't
Yeah,
understand, and you say I got it, everyone's in trouble.
that yeah, exactly. Then you're getting a pilot deviation. That ATC controller is going to be ticked off at you. And honestly, you're posing a safety hazard right now. You're not doing what they're
Right.
telling you to do. And so at least the analogy that I had found was for us pilots, we have a CFI. It's a certified flight instructor, and that's the person sitting there with you for your first, X amount of flights, and he's there to guide you. With that first ATC call, I did not know anything. I did not know what he said at all. And you need that CFI to sit there and, for the first few times, they might respond for you, but then they're going to walk you through it. They're going to make sure that those communications are clear between ATC, between the CFI, between the student. Um, and then from there, you might go, I know the communications plan is a big thing with ERP, right? So how are we going to talk consistently throughout this flight, throughout aviation as a whole? So it's definitely super critical both in aviation and ARP that everyone's using the same terms, the same phraseology, all of that kind of stuff as you go through this process.
Right. So in the ERP, that means you deeply understand what in the real world, like ATC controllers. But in the ERP implementation world, it can have the same disorienting um, feeling if you haven't done this before. If you've done it 20 years ago and the world has changed, and you're now sitting in a room with a software consultant asking you questions about your world using words that you don't understand, and you have to make sure you're asking those follow-up questions. The good thing about an ERP implementation, either in discovery phase, configuration, or implementation phase, is that you don't have, you at least don't have danger to life. It's not a safety hazard. Um, but you have the opportunity to really ask questions. You have the opportunity to understand what's being asked of you, the words being used, and it's okay to do that. You don't have to feel like you don't belong in the room, or that that you're going to sound not smart if you ask questions. It's critically important, like Isaac said, to have an understanding of what's being said, what's being asked for, so that you can either say yes or no, agree to these process changes or those configurations uh, before you uh, uh, before you put the whole organization at risk because you didn't understand the question or the communication. So I'll keep working on my ATC comms. There's several apps I think that you can download to just practice.
Yep.
But in terms of ERP implementations, it's a little easier, but it's the same concept. Make sure you understand what's being talked about. Let's talk about the pre-flight, which I think is ERP readiness, right? In terms of where you're going. You want to go somewhere. You want to go to a different city. You want to go to the beach. Uh, the first thing the pilot's going to do is chart the course. You're going to read the weather. You're going to make sure that you're not going to run into anything that is going to cause trouble to your flight. Pre-flight planning is what I would liken to pre ERP assessment, right? Now that we've determined that you're ready, your checklists look good, your people are ready, where do you want to go, and how do you know you've got there? In FAA, in flight terms, there's different terminologies, but it's the same concept. You're going to look at a map, you're going to chart your path, you're going to know how fast you're going to go, how high you're going to go, and how much weight you can carry, how much fuel you're going to need. So I think route planning is just like project planning, timelines, phases, milestones, who's going to do what. Your fuel planning is more like budgets and contingencies. Like, do you have enough fuel to get to where you're going? Do you have the
Yep.
right budget? Do you have the right kind of contingencies planned? And then weight and balance really is staff capacity, leadership focus. Do you have the right governance team? Is everybody in the right place? Uh, is the right person in the right seat, to use an EOS term? And then you go back to your pre-flight assessment. You're going to go back to your checklist and see, did we do everything that we were supposed to do to make this a successful mission? Let's take a question. Millen asks, how do you help all of the stakeholders get on the same page as far as terminology goes? I mean, there's several ways of doing it. We've done things like glossaries, right? You can have written glossaries of commonly used terms, FAQs. We always point new clients to our video bank, our YouTube channel, which if you haven't subscribed, please go ahead and do so. Lots of great content and material out there that will give you a great understanding of what you're getting into, what you're about to undertake for your organization. So, and a lot of this is also up to the stakeholders. If they are going down this path of an ERP implementation, they have to educate themselves too. But as consultants, we're always there, and we can give you a lot of resources. Um, what about aviation, Isaac? How do people get on the same page?
Yeah, I know we're trying to draw similarities here, but I think you kind of touched on a good point earlier that, the FAA is this governing body, right? They literally teach you how to respond to these ATC calls so that it's efficient, right? Like
Yeah.
you might have heard me say tree instead of three earlier. Like there are little things like that they specifically tell you, how to say these things, the order in which you say them back. Um, but like you said, AV, we don't have that here, right? Each project is different. Each client calls certain things by a different name, And so it's just getting aligned at the beginning of each project with your client, making sure that we set that, we kind of we organize that at the beginning, right? You don't want to be miscommunicating with ATC mid-flight. So why would you do it with ERP when you can
Yeah.
do that stuff at the beginning, right?
Yeah. Right. No, good point. And by the way, I've been trying to present this just like a visual um, companion to this presentation. I'm going to put it in the chat box. Go ahead and check it out. It'll help you with some graphics and talking points we have here. Um, let's talk about checklists. I'm not a huge fan in real life of checklists. Checklists are a huge part of aviation because there are very specific, finite things you need to do to make sure you're not putting anyone in danger, right? Uh, and when you equate that to an ERP implementation, there's a few things that come to mind. And verify, don't assume is the first thing, right? You have to, as a pilot, even without checklists, after doing checklists, pages, as a pilot, you're taught to always scan the horizon. Other planes, birds, clouds, if you're not supposed to be flying through them. So checklist is just one part. What is it that makes, according to you, what do you think makes checklists useful? Because I think you need a lot more than checklists. Checklists can't cover everything. So what is the place of checklists in an ERP implementation or in aviation?
Yeah, I agree. I think it's a rough. I think it's important to kind of differentiate checklists and templates. Maybe that might
Mm-hmm.
help because while you might take a airline pilot that has 5,000 hours, they have done the same thing over and over and over, and they still use checklists, right? Because no matter how many times you've done it, something can slip through if you don't really pay attention. And so I like that part as far as checklists go. Um, if you can get them all encompassing, if you can make sure that they include anything, yes, they're great to make sure that you hit your bases and don't let anything slip through the cracks. But I
Mm-hmm.
agree that as far as templates go, no project is the same. And so if you're trying to use a template, if you're trying to force something on a client's project, it's not going to work, right? And so that's where you have to be kind of careful. Yes, do your due diligence, have your checklist, make sure that you're doing all of the little details, no matter how familiar you are, but don't let it be a template.
Yeah, good point. And then you also get to documenting key processes, approvals, scope changes, uh, your purchasing thresholds, your testing protocols. You have to document all of those, and that's outside of the checklist. I mean, you have to create these documentation sets so that your implementation is a success. You also have to prevent human error, and I think you do that through standardizing critical things. Again, to your point, difference between checklists, templates, and standardization. It all has to come together to make sure that everyone involved knows how to do a certain thing. Um, and I think that's where the magic happens. And then resist rushing. Uh, I think there's a tendency during ERP implementations to just do the thing so we can get to the end and go live. And to me, that is flying extremely fast, extra fast, so you can land at a certain time. But I don't know, but rushing is never good, right? What's typically the saying in aviation, or what are we taught to do instead of
Yeah,
rushing?
yeah, follow your checklist and stay ahead of the plane, right? I don't know if that's what you're getting at, but at least as far as my instrument rating goes, dude, it's the biggest thing that you can do is stay ahead of that plane. So what does that mean? It means we have frequencies that we're speaking on, and they change throughout the stages of flight. And so if you can know that next frequency and put it into your comms to have it ready before ATC tells you to do it, that's what you're gonna do, right? So it's stay prepared for the things that are coming in the future, but um, just stay ahead of the plan, stay ahead of the project, um, and that way, when things do change, you have the time built in to kind of adjust for those problems because you're not also trying to recalculate fuel or change to a new frequency if you get deviated, whatever it might be.
That's a great point. I think staying away ahead of the plane is and staying ahead of the project is fundamental to good project management. It's anticipation, risk management. It covers so many things because you should be good at predicting where this is going to be in the next 2 weeks or the next month. And for an airplane, it's instant. Where are we going to be in the next 2 minutes? What's coming up? How do I need to deviate my plan without losing um, any of the key attributes of my flight, right? Getting there on time, not burning through your fuel, putting people at danger. So staying ahead of the plane or the project is just paramount to good project management. Let's talk about situational awareness, right? That's a good segue because you might have the best flight plan, you might have done all the checklists, you might have done everything right. What kind of situational awareness do you need to be good at uh, to modify your plans to make sure you're still getting there at the same, again, like I mentioned, right fuel, right weight and balance without losing anybody off the plane? What do you think
Right.
of situational awareness?
Yeah, sure. So I mean, a lot of that work we try and do beforehand, right? That's why you file an alternate airport if you do have something go wrong. You have ways to calculate fuel, um, but ultimately you don't know. That you're always got to be paying attention, literally looking out for other planes while you're up there in the sky, which people might not expect, but you do have to
Yeah.
do it. So you have to have that situational awareness, and I think maybe the best analogy is a scan. Um, Pilots fly a lot based off their instruments, right? We have a lot of things that tell us what's going wrong or what's going right, how things look, and you're taught how to physically look at these different instruments in a way where you don't miss anything. And I think that's really
Hmm.
important as you're going through a project, right? How can we monitor everything that's happening in this process so that we don't again let anything slip through the cracks? Our maybe our fuel is dropping low. We want to make sure that our budget's not getting neglected. So how do we scan the environment and really keep track of everything that takes place in these really potentially long processes?
Well, and notice that we haven't talked about the type of airplane. These things all apply for a single prop to a large, you know,
Yep.
jetliner. Um, of course, varying complexities, but you still have to do all of it, all at the same time, all at the best of your, not just the best of your abilities. You have to do it at a certain standard and always stay ahead of the airplane. That those things apply to every kind of aircraft. So translated to software terms, it doesn't matter what you're buying. Some might need more of this, more attention than others, but if you're not doing the bare minimums of making sure your planning is right, that your project management is right, that you're looking out for risks, you're staying ahead of the project, it's probably not going to go too well, right? In a larger project, you might need a bigger team, more budget, more time, but these are the same concepts. You cannot ignore the basics of aviation just because you have a small plane.
That's right.
Yeah, and situational awareness, right? You mentioned monitoring conditions. You have to track your implementation environment constantly on a daily basis. You have a dedicated PMO team that does nothing but looks at the health of your project, right? You have to assess change, emerging risks and constraints. You have to have a risk register to make sure you're keeping an eye on all the possible risks that may arise during this project and have a contingency plan for how to mitigate those risks. And then anticipating challenges like we talked about, looking ahead for potential turbulence, and having an adaptive approach. Project management and project planning does not mean you have to stick to the plan. That's called foolish consistency, right? You have to have a plan and a Gantt chart and a sequence of events, but it's always dynamic. The key is communicating that to your users. The key is letting people know what is going on, why we're changing certain things, and adopting or leaning on the change control process to make sure your changes are well documented, justified, and that you're not spending every piece of your contingency on unwanted change orders. So keeping your eye on what's going on, situational awareness is really critical in aviation and in project management for ERP systems. Um, what about autopilot, right? Let's switch gears a little bit here, because modern planes, like our friends here locally at Cirrus Aircraft, just released, shout out, just released their what is it, safe return on their small
Yep.
prop planes on the
Yeah.
SR-22s,
Yep.
and it's mind blowing. You hit a few buttons and you're in the sky. And I've had the pleasure of flying in one of those jets where autopilot flew most of the way between here in Nashville, right? So why do you need a pilot? Why do you need a sponsor for an ERP project? Tell me,
Yeah.
if self flying planes are on the horizon, what are we doing in
Well,
flight school?
I'll tell you, my plane certainly does not have autopilot. It's from 1969, so I don't quite have that luxury. But no, no, I think we could go a couple directions with autopilot. But the way at least I took it is autopilot is nice when there's calm skies and everyone likes to be on autopilot, right? I've got to do it like once or twice. You can click the button and everything goes right generally, but
Yeah.
um, at least my reality, I feel like, is that that's not how it always goes, right? We're taught as pilots when you hit weather, when you hit icing, right? These are things where what are you taught immediately? Turn off that autopilot and hand fly the plane. So we have to take some of those physical controls sometimes because it's not always going to go smooth. Autopilot's nice, but you have to have that pilot there that still can communicate with ATC, right? That's not something that autopilot is, quite good enough at yet, maybe in the Cirrus in
Yeah.
the coming future, but you need to be able to communicate and you need to be able to take control when things, do go wrong or start to veer off path, right? Autopilot's not always going to get you there. It's not always going to get you all the way to landing. So that's where that pilot is still really necessary.
Well, and I bring it up because autopilot shows up in ERP implementations in several different ways, right? One is and probably the biggest one is the leadership is not engaged. That project kicks off, a great start to the project, and the executive sponsorship or whatever the leadership of that project is just steps back and assumes that things are going to go the same way throughout this year and a half long project. And when executives check out, the project tends to drift because everyone needs those people to be engaged. The executive sponsors need to make key decisions, prevent risk, mitigate risk, help you get out of risky situations. And being disengaged or assuming the plane's going to fly itself. Yeah, you have a team, right? But executive sponsor to me is the chief pilot on this 18-hour flight between here and Sydney, Australia. Let's just say you can't put it on autopilot for that whole time. You have to stay engaged. You have to know what's going on, even if you're going to go take a nap in the back. I think that's what they do. Um, my little brother is a commercial pilot, by the way, so I asked him questions about how you can go take naps in the back, and he said we don't do that. Um, the other piece of autopilot is also vendor drift, right? The vendors can lose focus. Again, it's nobody's fault. If no one's watching the project at all times, no one's keeping track of whether or not both parties are getting what they want out of this engagement, there can be vendor drift where that it happens to the best of us. You're trying to maximize your margins and profits, get the project done, get it live, go on to the next implementation, and you can tend to lose track of customer service, what the client wants, what we signed up for, and just check boxes. So that's the other side of autopilot that can be really detrimental to the project. So having active controls with active hands-on leadership throughout the implementation journey is really important. Now, that's when I say that, I don't mean that the sponsor needs to be in every project meeting, every configuration session, but they need to have the right structure in place so that they can play the executive sponsor role. And we've talked quite a bit about what that means and what it doesn't. It's different from program management. Executive sponsorship is something that you are more of the, like I said, the pilot. You're making sure you have the budget, that the political climate remains in your favor, and that the outcome is going to really enhance the organization's operations. Let me see if we have any questions. All right, Mason, you see any similarities between a clear flight plan and pulling together an implementation roadmap? You want to take that, Isaac?
Yeah, sure.
Same thing. Yeah.
Yeah, we talked about flight plans a lot. Um, Pilots, we don't take off typically without a flight plan, right? Even if you're flying just for fun, generally you've done something beforehand, and either way you have a plan that you've talked with your co-pilot about or you've told ATC about. um, ERP projects should not take off without a plan either, right? There's no need to rush into these things. That's where you put yourself in you know potentially dangerous situations as a pilot. Now hopefully no one's being physically harmed in a ERP implementation or at risk of that, but there is that similarity, right? um,
Yeah.
and then yeah, what, deviation without like coordination, that's where we get into delays as pilots, um, and confusion, and like I said, ultimately risk. um, a project plan that sets out scope, it sets out um, milestones. So that's our route, that's our checkpoints, and then ultimately our the goals of the project are our destination as pilots. So setting all that stuff up properly in the beginning, like I've said before, is extremely important. And the better your flight plan, the better your project plan, the more efficiently, the safer you're going to get to your end goal.
That's awesome. All right. Next question. Quinn says, how do you prepare everyone on board for the possible turbulence along the way? I think it's called change management in the ERP world. Um, but I think in aviation, you just tell them at pre-takeoff briefing that, hey, put your seatbelts on. There might be turbulence, and I don't want your head hitting the ceiling. Um,
Yeah.
but in
I
in
mean, maybe the
in
best,
projects like ERP, yeah, go ahead.
which well, I don't know what would change too much if you hit turbulence. Maybe the beverage cart doesn't come around. That's about as close of an analogy as I can get to, as far as
Yeah,
adapting to change as far in an airline
I
flight.
think
So
I think in that sense, aviation is better than ERP implementations, right? In a digital transformation, if you have turbulence, you're talking about disgruntled employees, you're talking about customers not being served, you're talking about political risk. You're in the newspapers because your project isn't going well. Risk of lawsuits. There's a lot more that can go wrong. And when we say turbulence, it's not meeting timelines, you're overspending on your project, you're losing key resources. There's several things that can impact your project mid-flight that you need to be prepared for. And I think change management is a huge part of avoiding turbulence in projects, making sure people are communicated to, they know what's going on, what the outcomes are going to be, what the timelines are, and what's expected of them um, as they're doing their day jobs, by the way, right? So there's a lot of communication that needs to happen early, upfront, and on an ongoing basis to make sure that turbulence in projects doesn't really impact anything too much. Now, in aviation, there's a thing called black box, right? If there's, I mean, it's called a flight recorder,
yeah,
where everything about the flight is being recorded. In case of a crash, they recover the box and study what happened. And ERP implementations are not fatal, not yet. I haven't seen one, but I think similar concept, right? You have to establish KPIs. We keep talking about what it means to go live, right? Just meaning that the system is installed and it's working for the software provider doesn't mean that the client is live. So what are the KPIs around that? How do you measure performance? You track metrics throughout the implementation, and conducting honest reviews and perspectives on how this project is going, has gone, without blaming anybody is really key. So post-modern, once you go live with the project, even if it goes well, is really important. You have to go back and look at what worked, what didn't work. Did we meet our KPIs? Did we meet our timelines, our milestones, our budgets? And then apply the lessons learned for the next one, right? We say, flights happen in our world. I'm on a flight almost every week, but ERP implementations don't happen that often. You'd be lucky to have had only one in your lifetime or your career, right? Most people go through one or two, especially in our clientele. So applying lessons learned, and building better next phases or um, next projects is critically important. And that's another thing that aviation does really well. There's a lot of data being collected. There's a lot of KPIs that come out of those checklists and your flight plans. How much did you stick to the plan? What changed? Why did you change? Especially in an accident, that's really important to go back and check. And then the last thing is landing. How do you land this plane? Um, and by the way, I think landing to me was much easier than taking off. I don't know why. I
Wow,
just figured that out quicker.
that's a
What about
rare
you?
experience. So you're gifted in that, I guess.
I don't know, man. But let's talk about what that means in ERP implementations, typically going live, making sure your users can use the product. You've taken all of this pain to plan, to find the money, to find the political support. You've flown the plane for a couple of years. Now it's time to go live. And of course, as pilots, there's checklists, right? You have to make sure that your pre-landing checklist is all ticked off, that you have your landing gear down, and you're on approach. Um, Tell me what a pilot goes through right before landing.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you hit it on the head. Hopefully landing is, once you learn how to do it, obviously, hopefully it's the easiest. It's the best part of the flight. You've got there, you've got to your goal safely, efficiently, whatever it might be. Um, but you're right. It's everything that went into it beforehand is now going into that, right? Did you plan accordingly so you're landing with enough fuel, or did you take on too much fuel so now you're landing heavy and so now you need a longer runway, whatever it might be, a timeline extension. Um,
Yeah,
all of those things go into a safe and proper landing. And I think my best analogy was some of my best landings came from my best approaches, right? If you come in, and as pilots know this, if you come in too high and now you got to pull power and you got to add a bunch of flaps or maybe even slip the plane, which is really fun. I don't know if you got to do that, but
yeah,
um, like, or you come in too low, so now you're adding extra power to try and get back on your glide slope, whatever it might be. Those can make for unsafe and less good landings overall, right? So if you've done all the work beforehand and you can't lose, you can't get distracted, right? That
yeah.
approach, you can start to, oh, we're pretty much there. We can stop doing the checklist. I see the airport. We're pretty much there. Whatever. That can't happen, right? You have to keep following the checklist. You have to keep paying attention. You have to set yourself up for, on glide slope so that you have that soft landing and you're there successfully. The project has gone through well. Um, and so I think a lot of it, like we said, the landing is obviously the end goal, but a lot of that work is done beforehand and setting it up.
Right. And you always have the chance to go around. If you don't feel right, go
That's
around. What
absolutely
that
right.
means in
That's right.
aviation is if you're not hitting all of these metrics, you're not on the right path, you're not at the right angle, you're not at the right altitude, you don't have enough power, we're always taught to go around. What that equates to is if you're not ready to go live on a certain day, don't do it. The risks are too high. So
And
it
that's
all goes back
ATC.
to, yeah,
ATC knows that, right? They'll clear you to land, right? But it is ultimately up to the pilot to set that and say,
yeah,
"Hey, I'm not comfortable. I'm going to go around," and they accept that every time. I think that
yep,
kind of relates pretty well.
yep. Every time. And as long as you have fuel, they'll let you go around. So
Yep.
that equates to you can change your mind. It's not as easy as going around. There's a lot more implications, but you don't have to. If you're not ready, don't do it. But that therein lies the gray areas, the fine print. What does being ready for go live mean? And how do you know? You have to define it early. What does that mean for you? What does it mean for you, the user, not the software provider? Your users need to be ready to go live. Your systems need to be ready. You need to define all of that upfront before you even take off on this project. And then all of this done, like Isaac said, it's a soft landing. You don't even know you're there. If you're me, back of the plane, I'm napping, not as a pilot. And the best landings are where you're at the gate and you wake up. And by the way, during flights, if you're a pilot, if you're a passenger, not a pilot, cocktails are really important in the back cabin. During an ERP implementation, cocktails are really important too. And if you come see us at GFOA, we'll be in Washington D.C. Later this month, and one of our cool giveaways at our booth are anti-hangover pills. Because if you're going through an implementation of an ERP system, you're gonna need cocktails. You're gonna need anti-hangover pills. Um, but we're gonna wrap on that note. And by the way, before you all go, I want to give you a couple of freebies. One is our ERP transformation survival kit. The QR code's on the screen right now. Scan it. It'll take you to a document that has all of the things we just talked about, minus the aviation metaphors. And it is very useful. If you're thinking about an ERP transformation, if you're going through one right now, please download this so you have all of the kit items available to you. It's got all kinds of checklists, all kinds of information on how to do this well. And if you think we've missed something, give me a shout. I'm on LinkedIn. You can find us on YouTube. If you haven't subscribed, go ahead and subscribe. Um, but Isaac, this has been a fascinating conversation today, and I wish you the best in your aviation and consulting journey. And I think we will be back with you at some point talking about something else. But thank you all for joining us. And we are live every week on Wednesday. If it's not me, it's someone else from the team. And our live streams turn into our video playlist on our YouTube channel. And we have a couple of podcasts. We have great blogs on our website. All of this is available for free. And even if you're not a client of ours, go check it out. Parting thoughts, Isaac?
This, yeah, this was a lot of fun. I like the analogy, so we'll have to do this again sometime for sure.
We'll find something else. All right. Thank you all for joining.